What we are witnessing in southern Syria is not a sudden outbreak of chaos, but the inevitable consequence of a fragile state system unraveling under the weight of tribal tension, regional interference, and strategic power vacuums. The province of Suweida, long known for its Druze majority population, has become the epicenter of Syria's most violent internal clashes since the collapse of the Bashar al-Assad government in late 2024. What began as a localized dispute between Druze militias and Arab Bedouin fighters has evolved into a brutal conflict with national and regional consequences. Entire neighborhoods have been burned to the ground. Thousands of civilians are trapped, and every institution of order is breaking under pressure. The new interim government in Damascus has called for a ceasefire, but its words have no traction on the ground. The ceasefire agreement was, at best, a symbolic gesture. Fighting continued as factions ignored it entirely. Syria's security forces, deployed hastily to the south, have proven unable to contain the violence. Some have even been repelled by tribal fighters more experienced and more deeply entrenched than the new central authority.
This is not merely a civil conflict. It is a warning signal. It speaks to a larger truth in the post-Assad era, that the Syrian state remains hollow, fragmented, and vulnerable to both internal fractures and external manipulation. And in the midst of this instability, foreign actors have already begun to shape the battlefield in ways that may permanently alter Syria's sovereignty. The question now is not only who will win the fight for Suweida, but whether Syria, as a coherent state, can survive the forces being unleashed there. When President Bashar al-Assad was finally removed from power in December of 2024, it did not mark the end of conflict in Syria, but the transition to a more complex phase of fragmentation. For over a decade, Assad's regime had held together a precarious network of alliances, coercion, and military control. His fall created a power vacuum, not only in Damascus, but in every corner of the country where local factions had once been repressed by the state. Suweida, in particular, had always been a unique case. As a majority Druze region, it had maintained an uneasy autonomy even during the civil war years. The Druze population, a religious minority following an esoteric branch of Islam, had managed to avoid direct confrontation with the central government. Instead, they built local militias, developed self-governing structures, and stayed out of broader sectarian battles. But in the post-Assad landscape, Suweida's isolation has become its weakness. Rival tribes, particularly from the Bedouin communities, saw an opportunity to assert control over land, resources, and local authority. Long simmering tensions exploded, turning the province into a battlefield between competing visions of power. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the total collapse of trust between these groups. Every home burned, every field looted, every execution carried out in the streets of Suweida has deepened the cycle of revenge. Civilians no longer see state forces as protectors, but as outsiders, unable or unwilling to stop the violence. As the security apparatus crumbles, local militias have become the only organized force left, and many are acting not in defense, but in pursuit of dominance. Meanwhile, the regional environment has shifted in a way that accelerates the chaos. Israel, long a silent observer of Syria's internal dynamics, has taken a more direct approach. On Wednesday, Israeli fighter jets conducted coordinated strikes against the Syrian Defense Ministry headquarters in Damascus, along with multiple military installations in the south. The rationale was strategic signaling. Israeli officials framed the strike as a response to the destabilizing role of pro-Iranian militias and the Syrian military's support for anti-Israeli factions operating from southern Syria. But the message was broader. It was a declaration that no vacuum would be left unchallenged near Israel's borders. This strike is not just a show of force, it is a preemptive doctrine. Tel Aviv understands that a fractured Syria could become a launchpad for asymmetric threats and is positioning itself to shape events on the ground before such threats materialize.
The interim Syrian government's response has been largely rhetorical. They condemned foreign intervention and called for tribal unity. But the truth is, their grip on power is theoretical. Orders from Damascus are rarely obeyed beyond its walls. And in places like Suweida, the state is no longer the actor setting the rules. It is a witness to its own disintegration. Inside Suweida city, the situation has collapsed into a humanitarian disaster. Electricity has been severed. Water systems are inoperable. The internet has been cut, a deliberate attempt to contain the flow of images and testimony, but ultimately, futile. The world has already seen the aftermath. Entire city blocks lie in ruins. Arab Bedouin fighters have looted everything from livestock to medical supplies, from farm equipment to furniture. A city that once functioned as a modest regional center is now an open wound on the Syrian map. The hospital, what remains of it, is overwhelmed. Doctors operate without electricity, using flashlights or mobile phones. Supplies are vanishing. Patients, many with gunshot wounds to the head or limbs, are stabilized without anesthesia or not at all. The civilian population is trapped. An estimated 30,000 residents remain hidden in their homes, unable to flee due to snipers, street clashes, and roadblocks. Every day they survive is a gamble. The scenes are harrowing. One Druze woman, shot through the jaw by a sniper, was dragged to a field hospital by Arab fighters. Her shoulder and arm had also been hit. She is one of the lucky ones. In other cases, entire families have been found executed. Some burned beyond recognition, others, with bullets to the head, left in the streets as warnings. These are not military casualties. These are acts of retribution, of tribal reckoning, driven by cycles of history, land disputes, and identity politics. Revenge is no longer an abstract notion. It is the currency of the moment. Online videos fuel the rage. Allegiances shift not based on ideology, but on blood. This is not a war for Syria. It is a war for survival in a vacuum of law. The interim government has attempted to project authority by deploying security forces to the region. Their mission was twofold: prevent more Arab fighters from entering the city, and stabilize key infrastructure. They failed on both counts.
The armed groups, better organized and more motivated, repelled most government units before they could secure a foothold. In several cases, security forces were ambushed en route to their positions. Many were forced to retreat. Others simply disappeared, blending into the chaos, unwilling to sacrifice for an institution that no longer commands loyalty. Israel's temporary agreement not to bomb government positions during the deployment was supposed to provide a narrow window for action, but it changed nothing on the ground. The ceasefire was ignored, and the violence intensified. Tribal leaders, particularly Hikmat al-Hajiri of the Druze militia, have refused to fully submit to Damascus. He accuses the government of failing to act early, of letting the Arab tribes escalate unchecked. Meanwhile, the Interior Ministry blames al-Hajiri for instigating resistance and blocking reconciliation. Neither side sees the full picture. Each is operating with one eye open, blaming the other, while the country burns beneath them. The current balance of forces reveals a deeper structural truth. Syria is no longer a unitary state. It is a mosaic of armed territories, tribal enclaves, and outside-influenced zones. Each claims legitimacy. None holds authority. In this vacuum, new patterns of power will emerge not from elections, but from endurance. The roots of the conflict go far deeper than recent events. The Druze and Bedouin tribes have a long and complicated history in southern Syria. The Druze, insular, hierarchical, and fiercely protective of their autonomy, have maintained a cultural and religious distinctiveness for centuries. The Bedouin, more decentralized, but equally proud, have long sought access to grazing land, water, and territorial influence. During the Assad years, these tensions were suppressed through selective patronage and military pressure. But they were never resolved. They were frozen, waiting for the ice to crack. Now that it has, the release is violent. Already, Iranian-backed militias are positioning themselves further west. Turkish drones are monitoring border zones. Israeli jets fly missions deep into Syrian airspace. American intelligence assets are reportedly watching not to intervene, but to understand which actors might become useful or dangerous. This is not just a Syrian civil war. It is a testing ground for post-regime geopolitics, with global implications. He praised the heroic tribes, then urged them to submit to state authority. But no such authority exists in practice. The proposed humanitarian corridor, intended to extract the 30,000 civilians trapped in the city, has yet to materialize. Negotiations with tribal leaders have stalled. Each side demands guarantees the others cannot provide. No one wants to be the first to disarm. Even if the corridor opens, it will be temporary. The war for Suweida will continue, and each time it resumes, it becomes harder to imagine Syria returning to any unified political structure. Suweida is not just a city on fire. It is a signal flare in the dark. Suweida's strategic importance lies not only in its geography bordering Jordan, close to Israel, and proximate to Damascus, but also in its symbolism. If Suweida falls into complete anarchy, it will signal to every faction in Syria that central control is a myth. It will embolden others to carve out their own fiefdoms. And it will invite regional actors to intervene directly in zones of interest. It shows us that ceasefires are not paper agreements. They are living processes requiring legitimacy, enforcement, and the will to act beyond rhetoric. The interim president's recent speech, calling for calm, unity, and a rejection of foreign interference, was designed to project stability. But even his most loyal advisors understand that the speech is a formality, a gesture to buy time. Whether it can rebuild, or whether it will remain a fractured frontier between old empires and new powers, the world should pay attention. Because what is burning in Suweida may one day be the spark for something far larger.